Welcome to the deep dive. Tonight we are examining a deeply tragic story from Litherland, Merseyside, where a quiet family evening was just completely shattered by targeted violence. We're opening up a stack of sources that detail the murder of an innocent young man and how an investigation, which was, initially hampered by silence, was ultimately cracked wide open by digital clues.
Right. And our mission here is to analyze the complexity of this case, the murder of 20-year-old Mikey Rainsford. We're focusing on the sources that really show how investigators navigated that entrenched wall of silence that's so common in these cases, and how they eventually proved motive and intent through, well, a handful of really unexpected digital footprints.
And Mikey Rainsford was, by all accounts, just an incredible young man. He was the glue of his family, a really talented skateboarder with massive potential, and he was killed in his own kitchen. A shocking, deliberate act of violence that was anything but random. Okay, so let's unpack this. Starting with the immediate horror of that night, based on what the family went through. It was shortly after 11 o'clock at night on Harrington Road. Mikey was, just getting ready for a quiet evening with his girlfriend. He was asking his dad for a ride, filling a bag with what the sources call essentials for a picnic, things like biscuits, crisps, drinks. His brother was half asleep on the couch nearby.
And the sources really recount this sudden, violent intrusion of chaos into what was just a normal family moment. Mikey's brother Josh was just feet away when he heard what he called the loudest bangs I've ever heard. Hunter. He described it as going from being half asleep to being in a war zone in an instant.
Wow. And just on pure instinct, Mikey ran, startled his brother, and they both tried to find cover. They huddled together in the hallway, trying to get away from the windows. And then that devastating moment. Mikey said just one word, Dad, before he slumped backwards, sliding down the wall.
And the full tragedy was only revealed when they lifted his shirt. There were 2 gunshot wounds, one hole in his chest and another one in his back.
Yeah.
His brother desperately tried CPR, doing chest compressions, and he heard Mikey make this noise he described as like a roar of somebody that didn't want to die.
Mm-hmm.
And then the color just drained from him. He died right there on the floor of his family home.
What's immediately significant here, according to the sources, is how the police assessed the attack itself. Because of the spacing and the placement of those 2 shots, officers concluded that the shooter was actively tracking Mikey.
Yes, exactly. This wasn't indiscriminate violence. It wasn't a wild spray of bullets. The sources highlight that precision as the first major clue. It told them the motive was deliberate, targeted. It was an execution.
And that deliberate act instantly fractured the family's life. Their home became a crime scene swarming with armed police, carrying heavy weapons. They were just escorted out, told they couldn't retrieve anything, and had to abandon everything in an instant.
It's hard to imagine the shock of that. Being separated from your home, your refuge, in the middle of the night.
Which brings us to our second section, who Mikey was, and the dangerous reality of the environment he lived in. The sources paint this really vibrant picture of his potential. He was a prodigy skateboarder, far advanced by age 13, skating with guys in their 20s. He had, quote, massive potential to represent England.
And the police investigation completely confirmed this image. They searched his room, thoroughly. They were looking for anything that might justify this attack: drugs, cash, weapons. They found absolutely nothing. They concluded he was, in their words, an innocent person.
And this innocence is set against this backdrop of serious organized crime in Merseyside. The sources confirm that access to firearms there is distressingly high, and the whole area is defined by what they call postcode tribalism.
That tribalism is so key to understanding the context here. We know the violence is concentrated in the south end of Sefton, fueled by this territorial conflict between known gangs, specifically the Kirkstone Riot Squad, or KRS, and the Leaky Young Guns. The Leaky Young Guns were described as maybe a bit more organized, more entrenched, and turf control drives all of it.
And unfortunately, the sources make it clear that Mikey isn't the only innocent person caught up in this. They reference other devastating cases like the killings of Reese Jones and 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, which just underlines how easily a stray bullet or, a misplaced act of retaliation can find its way into an innocent life.
And Mikey knew this danger firsthand. Not long before his murder, he was chased by 2 people on a moped. One of them was actually wielding a machete, and they stole his pedal bike. This event was so terrifying that he told his family he was petrified and wanted to move out of the area. Just a devastating detail.
So, if the area is rife with gang activity, investigators usually face that major hurdle, the wall of silence. People are too afraid to come forward. The grass culture, as the police call it.
And that culture is what allows these cycles of violence to keep going. Police stressed in the sources that they can't resolve these problems without community support, but the threat of retaliation is very, very real.
So if silence is the biggest hurdle, how did the police crack this one? The sources suggest the answer came not from fear, but from collective grief. Because the community loved Mikey and everyone was just so heartbroken, the sources note that literally everyone in the community was speaking out.
Mm.
And this led to quick rumors on social media, Snapchat, Instagram.
And that immediate widespread chatter provided the first real leads. Within hours, police were hearing two key nicknames, Pip and Worm. This directed the entire investigation toward two individuals, the Foy brothers, James, who was in his late teens, and Michael, who was in his early 20s.
And the Foys. What were their connections to this environment?
Oh, they were well known to police, heavily associated with local gang life, specifically linked to the Lika Young Guns. They were notorious for riding off-road bikes and had a long list of prior offenses. Michael Foy, the older brother, had already served time for drug dealing. They were definitely on the police radar.
And the crucial pivot point, the thing that gave them the motive, happened right before the murder. At around 10:15 p.m., shortly before Mikey was killed, a local officer noticed a broken window at the home of the Foy brothers' mother, Joyce Smith.
Right, and Joyce Smith confirmed the damage was from a brick. Crucially, she told the officer that her sons, James and Michael, were fully aware of what had happened.
That timeline is just incredibly tight. The window was smashed at 10:15 p.m., and Mikey was murdered just 45 minutes later. If the response was that swift, what does that tell us? Was this really spur-of-the-moment retaliation, or were they already armed and ready to go?
It seems like a combination of both. The anger was spontaneous, but the means for violence were immediately available. Police immediately saw the bricking as the precursor, the provocation that fueled this swift, violent retribution.
The first step was confirming how the attack happened. Witnesses reported two people arriving and leaving on a unique electric motorbike, right? It was described as bronze or reddish.
Exactly. So the investigation turned to gathering hard evidence. CCTV inquiries quickly confirmed the Foys had access to an orangey bronze-colored electric bike, and the footage was chilling. It showed two figures leaving the Foy family's address and driving straight toward Harrington Road, Mikey's location. An investigator described their movement as, quote, almost like they were predators. They were hunting somebody.
But the physical evidence, the murder weapon, the bike, it was never recovered. So investigators had to rely almost entirely on the digital side of things. They tracked the Foy's movements using cell site data.
They did. And for our listener, it's worth clarifying what cell site data can and can't do. It tracks a phone's connection to the nearest mast, so it won't give you a precise location inside a house, for example. But it's incredibly effective at providing the general direction of travel and confirming a phone's vicinity to a specific area at a specific time. In this case, it verified they were in the area between their mother's call and the murder. It established opportunity.
So they have the motive, the brick. They have the CCTV of the bike leaving their home and heading toward the victim's street. They have the cell site data. But the sources stressed this was still a largely circumstantial case. Why wasn't that enough to secure a conviction right there?
Because in court, especially a murder trial, jurors often want to see that definitive physical link. The lack of the murder weapon and the bike left the prosecution with a pretty significant gap. The defense could argue, sure, the Foys were riding a bike that night, but there's no direct proof that that bike was at Harrington Road or that they pulled the trigger. They needed something incontrovertible.
And that definitive link came from a piece of intelligence that was basically designed to disappear. Investigators executed a warrant and seized an individual's phone, which contained a critical Snapchat video.
This was the absolute turning point. The video was posted from an account linked to James Foy. It was filmed while someone was sitting on that unique Orange Sun electric motorcycle. You can see the key fob, the frame. It was undeniable.
And the caption posted on the video was the boast that just defined the entire case. It read, "Tell your duck don't use bricks," followed by two bang-bang emojis.
It was an immediate, just blasé public boast. It laid out the motive in clear text, posted minutes after they took a life. It directly linked the brick attack on their mother's house to the murder. They were basically broadcasting their justification. You threw a brick through our house. This is what happens.
But most people believe Snapchat content just deletes after 24 hours. How is this recovered, especially if it wasn't on the shooter's own phone?
And that presumed ephemerality. That was their fatal error. The message wasn't recovered from James Foy's phone. It was recovered from a recipient's phone, a friend who had received a snap. And critically, that recipient had replied to the message. By doing so, their device retained the image. James Foy likely never imagined that his friend's reply would preserve the digital proof of his crime for the police to find months later.
So the 4-week trial concluded with a guilty verdict. Michael Foy, 22, and James Foy, 19, were both found guilty of murder. Unsurprisingly, the Snapchat message was called the most damning piece of evidence the police had.
The sentencing was severe. Michael Foy received life imprisonment with a minimum of 30 years. James Foy got a minimum of 28 years.
But the true tragedy of the motive was only revealed after the trial. The sources indicate that Mikey had categorically nothing to do with the broken window. He was completely innocent, the wrong target.
It was a swift, careless retaliation. Police concluded that a third party, described as an old friend of Michael's, who knew both the Foys and Mikey, had betrayed him. When the Foys called asking for the address of someone on Kirkstone, this person just recklessly threw Mikey's name out there, perhaps to deflect blame or settle some other score.
An act of just utterly devastating, careless betrayal that turned a property dispute into a death sentence. And the cruelty, it didn't end with the verdict. The victim's family suffered intense long-term costs. They received relentless death threats through social media, terrifying messages like, "You're going to be in a date like your brother. I'm going to put holes in your chest."
The sources reveal this forced them to make the heaviest ever decision to leave their beloved family home, the place where all their memories were. They were forced to leave without even telling their neighbors, just gone in the dead of night, never to return.
And the chilling end to the trial solidified the defendant's stunning lack of remorse. As the verdict came back, Michael Foy shouted across the courtroom, directly to the grieving family, "I'll be out in 20 years, but Mike, he'll still be in the mud."
A final act of defiance that showed their complete contempt for the law and for the life they took. And the sources offered one last, terrible digital signature. Investigators tracked Mikey's phone until the last known reading. The final entry placed the phone in the mortuary at the hospital, still in his pocket. A digital record that followed him right to the very end. Looking back at this case, the key takeaways are just so stark. We see the tragic reality of an innocent life lost entirely to gang retaliation, fueled by a careless betrayal. But critically, we see the undeniable role social media now plays, not just in fueling criminal bravado, but in providing the digital evidence needed to get a conviction when physical evidence is gone.
So, what does this all mean for you? It means recognizing that the fragility of life is amplified when information, even carelessly shared or obtained through betrayal, can be weaponized against the innocent. It also shows us that those who want to project power often use these digital tools to broadcast their strength, believing they are above any kind of accountability.
And this case demonstrates that when digital platforms are used for threats, the presumed ephemerality of the content, like a Snapchat message that's supposed to vanish, can be a complete illusion. So for you, the learner, what does the permanence of your digital footprint, even when recovered from a third party's device, tell us about accountability in the digital age? It suggests that the boast, carelessly recorded and shared, can be every bit as definitive and damaging as the physical bullet itself.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the digital footprint of a senseless tragedy. We'll see you next time.